I am from central Trinidad. Well, it's according to how you define where I'm from would be meaning. Like, if you mean where exactly you're born and grew up and where you live now, that would be a little different. But currently, I reside in central Trinidad. For the most of today, central was basically sunny. Not to know later on in the afternoon when I look at some videos online and some videos that have been sent, it's amazing to see what was going on in the west and in the north of the country, the amount of rain and the amount of floods. There seems to be quite a bit of lost property and damage to property, and my heart really goes out to any one of those affected. If any of my viewers here are affected, I really do hope that you see the best out of it in the end and that it works out well for you also. My heart really goes out to them. That's kind of, it's amazing to even think about the idea of water just running through your entire house and you losing thousands of dollars in value in just moments. That's kind of unbelievable to try and wrap your mind around in some context. And then in another way to look at it, like where I am right now was so sunny, and then right there a couple miles away was a whole different thing. And it really does happen that way in life, doesn't it, sometimes, where it's the experience that you have, what you see, the skies you see may very well be sunny, and someone not too far away from you may be experiencing a totally different existence and life in the same location seemingly, and you may expect them to be having the same sunny going as you may have, while they just may not be having that same experience. And the pandemic also is giving that a similar feeling like that, where there are some people that feel the effect and the effect of the pandemic and the lockdowns much more severely than other people. And it's one of the things that many people have been speaking about for quite some time now. And it's one of the reasons that the WHO itself rescinded their recommendation for the lockdowns. They spoke about only using lockdowns in the most severe cases. And since the WHO said that, I find when I look around in the world, most countries, most of the developed countries are still using the lockdown measures as their primary go-to measure. And it's understandable in a wealthy country when you could survive it, the lockdown, you could just lock everyone down. It's the safest measure, at least seemingly, in just natural thought. It could seem like, okay, this is the most extreme safe measure. We lock down everyone and we can take care of everyone. But the trickle-down effects of these lockdown measures are being felt far and wide, and the nature of how this trickle-down effect goes. Yes, it will trickle down, and probably some of the worst effects of the lockdown may be felt in some of the poorer countries, but it's all a cycle, so it's going to spin back and affect everyone eventually. Right now in Trinidad and Tobago, we are currently still under lockdowns, and the Prime Minister, during his last address weekend gone, he made some insinuations that made it seem like he was saying, in order for us to reopen, there needs to be more vaccination. Personally, I don't like that idea, because that wasn't the promise given at the start of the lockdown. And to hold the lockdown over a population's head in order to get them to vaccinate, I don't think that would stand up under the scrutiny of looking at it in a democratic manner. I don't think so. That seems a little off to me. And as is expected, our opposition leader is right there to jump in and speak about it. Persad Bisessa, time to end the lockdown. Now, she isn't just speaking only in the political front, because, as I said, there's a good reason to speak about it. The Supermarket Association and different stakeholders in that industry also commented on the rising food prices and the far-reaching consequences that they are experiencing and that they are forecasting in their industry, and they are dealing with food. That's a very important industry. That's something that's very crucial. So she isn't only speaking on the political side. There are different factors to hold and look into when you're looking at the lockdown. And this is something that, to to give myself some credit, I mentioned since I first started doing the YouTube videos, some of my early videos were criticizing some of the lockdowns and saying that the measures that we may feel, the consequences that we may feel of the lockdown, may be later down the road. So it's not just a question of whether it is lockdown or die from COVID. So you must choose the lockdown, because if it's not the lockdown, you're going to die from COVID. Okay, there's a risk from COVID, and maybe the lockdown does help avert some of that risk, but the lockdown does create its own risk in its own way. So it isn't exactly a full plan. But Pasad Bisessa, time to end lockdown. Don't forget to click that like button also if you haven't clicked that yet. And if you aren't subscribed, do subscribe and share the video to your friends who may be interested in this content. Let's increase the discussion and increase the viewers on it. Opposition leader Kamala Pasad Bisessa has called on the government to put an end to draconian lockdown measures, which she said have been ineffective. In a statement, Pasad Bisessa said the Prime Minister's harsh restrictions to control COVID-19 are not working, and the time has come for new approaches to fight the virus. There is no scientific data that supports this draconian lockdown, she said. Instead, Rowley continues to use rhetoric rather than reality to blunder his way through this COVID-19 crisis. Now, that statement that there is no scientific data that supports the lockdown, that statement is hyperbole. There is some data. If you're paying attention to the data that our scientists, that our health personnel are giving on their regular updates, you'd see that there is some difference to the lockdowns. And since the lockdowns have been eased, there has been some increase in the increase of how rapidly we are seeing COVID cases spread. So, okay, there is some scientific basis for the lockdown. To say there is none is being dishonest. You could probably quibble about the measures and the weight and how much benefit there is to the lockdown and whether the benefit outweighs the disadvantages. That's a fair critique, but to say there's none isn't fully honest. She said Dr. Rowley has kept the population constrained and is holding on to hope of positive change. The Prime Minister's claim that he's trying to balance lives and livelihoods has been shown to be nothing more than hollow words, as he has refused to account to the population for the mounting death toll from COVID-19 and the billions of dollars supposedly spent on funding for matters related to the pandemic. What is alarming is the government's plan to vaccinate to operate is now morphing into vaccinate or else stay locked down. This is yet another indication of Rowley's dictatorial tendencies, which must be rejected. We are heading into dangerous territory with the continued failing Keith Rowley administration at the helm, right? And it goes on like that for a bit. She goes in at Dr. Rowley, as is expected of political enemies or political antagonists. So she goes in, but I understand some of the criticisms there. And one of my criticisms for our position over and over and over is that they formulate almost all of their critiques and criticisms against the ruling party, against the government, in a tone and in a manner that is suited for mostly their most ardent supporters. Someone who is in the middle, someone who is looking maybe to change their mind. They aren't a full supporter of any one party. They don't hold any party cards. The nature of how the criticisms are levied from the opposition sometimes, it's with a very partisan tone at nearly all times. And the partisan tone doesn't go over very well on everyone. But there is some legitimate criticism and some legitimate worry when we're looking at the consequences of the lockdown measures. Brace for further hike in food prices. And this warning is coming from various members in the Supermarkets Association and in that food chain of importing and retailing and wholesaling foods. And they're speaking pretty candidly about the problems that they are facing right now and that they forecast in the future. In the last 6 months, there have been steep increases in the prices of imported food items. The price of pigtails, according to importers, skyrocketed by 74%. Canned corned beef went up by 36%. Yellow split peas and lentils rose by 34%. Wait. Yellow split peas and lentils, but I always thought those two peas were kind of on the cheaper side. If the cheap peas rising in prices, what do they expect us to really do? That is problematic. Split peas and lentils have risen by 34%, brown sugar climbed by 25%, and canned tuna increased by 15%. Other food items are set to increase by up to 50% in some cases when compared to last year's prices. The consensus among industry stakeholders is that prices will not stop rising anytime soon. Consumers will now have to dig deeper into their pockets to purchase even the basic food items from wholesalers and retailers. A shortage of shipping containers internationally and a steep increase in freight costs to ship these items locally since the COVID-19 pandemic started are the key factors in rising food prices, importers said. This is compounded by the perennial problem of a lack of foreign exchange. The former head of the Supermarket Association, Mr. Baliram Maharaj, he wrote a letter to the Trade Minister outlining the increases in prices and giving some specifics on them and saying that we are heading for great disaster if something isn't done soon. Now, one of my problems and one of my worries whenever I hear these things is what exactly is going to be done and what exactly can be done, and is asking for something to be done by the government and them getting involved. Are they going to help, or what they do, is it going to just hinder it further? But there are many problems, the Forex being one of the chief ones, and the importers say that they have to pay their handlers in this foreign exchange in US dollars, and we have a struggle to get US dollars in Trinidad and Tobago. That has been existing for years now and it is continuing. So that struggle to get US dollars is making it a difficult thing to bargain for importation. And they would have to pay an inflated price to get the foreign exchange on more in the formal markets. Let's put it that way. More than 60% of the world's white sugar is shipped in containers, and it has become increasingly difficult to source containers for sugar shipments, Maharaj said. Sugar is not a priority for shipping lines as it is heavy but low value, which means it can only be shipped in 20-foot containers, not 40-foot. Shippers prefer larger containers as they offer more capacity for the same handling cost, he added. Sugar, however, he said, was an essential item for local manufacturers producing ketchup, soft drinks, juices, etc. There is no white sugar available locally, and suppliers cannot guarantee order arrivals as it highly depends on the availability of vessels and empty containers. Should this trend continue, the small cottage industry manufacturers will be jeopardized, he said in the letter. This could cripple local SMEs. And there is where I see some of the far-reaching implications of the lockdowns. Especially in Trinidad of late, I am enjoying the fact that when I look out, especially in the millennial age group, there seems to be a burgeoning entrepreneurial class. Many people are trying their hands at their own small businesses, at their own personal entrepreneurial paths and career paths. And I like the idea. I think the more agency given to everyone by them being more, by people working more for themselves and working in a more entrepreneurial line, it would work for a better function in society as an entirety. Now, granted, everyone cannot be an entrepreneur and own their own business, or can they? Who knows? We maybe have to reimagine how we see society functioning, but as it stands, we don't see how that would be possible. But if you have a large group of people in this independent sector working on their own, the supply chains that they would get accustomed to would be dependent on the world functioning very normally. They wouldn't have the ability to call and personally charter their own freight liner to come across. They would have to work on regular commercial freight. And if those markets become interrupted and get more interrupted than they already have become, how are some of the smaller businesses going to survive? even after the lockdowns have been lifted. Let's say the forecast for the next 6 to 8 months are perfect, and in that time we see lockdowns progressively lifted across the world, which, to be honest, I do not see happening. Many places are going back into lockdowns, and the Delta strain is scaring many people. But let's say, for argument's sake, that that is what is going to happen, that we are going to get smoothly out of this. Would there be a supply chain to supply your small business if you want to continue running it, or if you want to reopen it, or if you want to start one even? But I think there may be hope in some of the recommendations that some of the supermarket owners and some of those stakeholders gave. One of the recommendations is that we get more accustomed to our local tastes and we turn more inward, even inward in a CARICOM sense. And I could agree to some extent to that. Now, I don't like the idea of it necessarily being forced. Someone was talking about put higher tariffs on foreign goods so that you push people into what to buy. I don't really like that idea. I don't like the idea of the government trying to control people's lives too much. The reason being, I don't trust those people, and I don't trust them in trying to control where my life heads. I would prefer me control that. But in you controlling your own life, if you have freedom, something that is said very regularly, and I try to keep saying it, freedom requires the responsibility of it. And if we're looking at the markets, if we're looking out at the future and seeing that there may be some difficulty in supply chains, so if you're doing something or if you're consuming something that requires some long, expansive supply chains that start on the other side of the world, then maybe as we exit this pandemic and we come out of the lockdowns, it may make sense to relook at some of, to have a relook at some of those things and how they function. Tell me what you think. Don't forget to drop that comment if you have something to say, and I'll see you again tomorrow for the next video.
Feel the music, rising with the time.